writing into their death. All right, good job with that. This is difficult stuff. We're going to keep plodding through it. And what we are going to be looking at today is a new form of poem. And we actually looked at one last week. Ozymandias, that you guys read last week, is a sonnet. And so we are going to figure out exactly what a sonnet is. And we are going to start with a discovery activity. And that is, I have a handout for those of you in the room for us to write on. You won't need Ozymandias. You don't have to go find it or anything. So I think you guys are pretty clever detectives. I want you to figure out what a sonnet is. And I think you can probably figure out several of the things that a sonnet is. So I've given you 4 examples of Petrarchan sonnets. There are several different types of sonnets, 4 or 5 main types. They have a lot of things in common and a couple of things that keep them apart. We're going to look at Petrarchan sonnets today, named after Petrarch, who is an Italian poet. And then on Wednesday, we're going to look at English sonnets that are also called Shakespearean. So poems by Shakespeare. What I want you to do first, though, all by yourself, is to look at the 4 examples that you've got. You've got 1 on the front and 3 on the back. And just see what they have in common. You do not need to read all 4 poems because we're looking at structure. So just visually, what do they have in common? You might read a couple of lines if you're looking for meter or rhyme scheme or something, but read through these and see what can you say Petrarchan sonnets all have in common based on these 4 good examples. And once you come up with some ideas, I want you to write them on this part of the handout that says, what commonalities do you notice? Try to find at least 3 things. observations. Right there. All right, so get together now with your partners and see if y'all agree on the things that this has in common. And Danielle, if you want to throw yours in the chat box. I guess nobody else is coming today. All right, so let's come together and share some of these. And I'm going to throw some of these up here on the board. What is one of the first things that you notice that they all have in common? Okay, there are two stanzas. Uh-oh, what has happened here? Don't do this again. No, Zoom, don't, please. All right, so I'm going to write on the board until we get Zoom to. So we have two stanzas. And what else do we notice about those stanzas? And so what then can we say about sonnets? They have 14 lines, every single one of sonnets, regardless of whether it's English or hybrid or whatever, it is going to be 14 lines long. Oh boy, my tech does not like me today. All right, what else? How many of them did you count? Okay, so if you counted more than 4 of them and you saw it over and over again, it's probably not a coincidence. So if there are, did you say 10 syllables? 10 syllables per line. What do we need to check next? The meter. Did anybody check the meter? Everybody take just a minute and check the meter. I'm going to see if I can make my tech catch up. It's what? Yeah, I heard you. I'm sticking with 10. Sometimes that, in this one in particular, in the Petrarchan one, this is a translated poem. And so there are a couple of discrepancies inside of it. If you look at the ones on the back, they're pretty regularly 10. If you're coming up with 11, it's quite possible that there's a dropped syllable or a pickup note kind of syllable that doesn't affect the regular meter. All right, anybody want to boldly guess what our meter is? The first syllable is not stressed. Okay, that gets us started with something. Okay, those of you who boldly said iambic pentameter, you are correct. This is, sonnets are written in iambic pentameter pretty much universally, whether it's Italian or English. Iambic pentameter is the way that they go. All right, so let's go back to these stanzas for just a minute, because you should notice that there are some vocabulary words down here. And those vocabulary words give us names for these different stanzas. Which one do you think is the octave? And why? Okay, we've got some base root words that we recognize. And so then what would the second one be? The sestet is what you call the second stanza. Now, I made this easy for y'all because I wanted you to see that pattern. When you're looking at a sonnet on a page, it's not going to break it into two pieces like this. I've done that to help us analyze it and to help us see how structure creates meaning in a sonnet, but they're just going to look like little squares on the page. And they look very fixed like squares because they're 14 lines, 10 syllables each. And so if you look at a poem on a page and it looks like a square, chances are good you're looking at a sonnet. All right, so we've got one more thing that I want us to notice about these before we move on. What other structure similarities did you notice between, for example, the octaves of every poem? Rhyme scheme. Okay, can we create a rhyme scheme pattern that matches what is the rhyme scheme of the octave? The answer is on the paper. Label it, label them at the end. Flowers starts with A. Does going rhyme with flowers? Does going rhyme with flowers?
No.
So that's a B.
It's like ABBA.
All right, that's 4 lines. We got 8 of them. What's the next one? All right, so the rhyme scheme in a Petrarchan sonnet for the octave is always ABBA, ABBA. That is the fixed rhyme scheme for the octave. Check out the sestets. Flip over on the back so you can look at more than one of them. What are you finding? We got to start with C. We've already got A's and B's covered. Are they all like that? No, they're not. So the rhyme scheme in the sestet is going to vary. And so it might be C, D, C, D, C, D. It might be C, D, E, C, D, E. It might be C, C, D, D, E, E. It's going to vary. So you are not going to have a fixed rhyme scheme for the sestet, but you will for the octave. All right, now one more vocabulary word that we need to catch here is the word volta. Volta means the turn. It's Italian, and so that is, it's an Italian sonnet, so we call it's the volta, which is turn in Italian, simple as that. And the turn in a Petrarchan sonnet occurs at a regular location. Can you guess where that could probably be? Okay, yes, good job. So it is going to occur at line 9 or at the beginning of the sestet, generally. Sometimes the poem will start to turn in line 8. Sometimes it will be the middle of line 9 before there's a solid turn. In this one, for example, the word but occurs in the middle of the 9th line. So this covers the format of the Petrarchan sonnet. The other thing we need to know about format has to do with the relationship between the octave and the sestet, but I want us to look at the sonnet 42 together in order to figure out what that would be. So if I close that, will it all stay there? I don't know. I think it stays, and then I thought that might happen. Yeah. Outside? Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was cold this morning, so I would assume so. Uh-oh, didn't want to do that. All right, so I love this poem. This is one of my favorite poems because it demonstrates the turn so well. Hopefully you've already had an opportunity to read over this once, but just in case you haven't, read through this poem silently. And off to the side, I just want you to consider, let me do it this way. Are you gonna give me the thing? There we go. I want you to consider what is the main tone of the octave and the tone of the sestet. Okay, read it silently, please. As you finish reading through it, jot down a couple of words off to the side. What tones do you see in the octave and the sestet? All right, so what do we think for the beginning here? What kind of tone do you see going on in the octave? Peaceful? Admiration. So that would be like maybe the attitude that the speaker has. If you're going to use a word like admiration, there has to be someone admiring something else. It's kind of a transitive verb. So the speaker, what does the speaker admire? Admires the flowers. Okay. Cheerful. All right. So we have a couple of things. We've said cheerful, peaceful. Other thoughts? All right. What is some of our evidence? What creates this tone? Dancing. Sprinkles. Dancing. What else? The gleam and glitter. Glowing. We have music and madness. The sweet, fierce powers. All right, and what is going on? What is this about? It's about spring. We have it right here. The spring returns. And this is how the spring returns. The spring returns with sprinkles and dancing and dripping and dropping and glowing and music and madness. And so we have all these word choices that help create this joyful, cheerful tone. And in terms of imagery, we have all these, well, we've got gleam and glitter and pearl and diamond, wet flowers. And so all this bright, positive imagery going on here. What do you notice about the verbs? Call out verbs when you see them. Say it louder, sorry. I still can't hear you, I'm very sorry. Returns, thank you. No, I just gotta find it. Oh, well, returns, okay. Glowing, dripping, going, powdering, dancing, dropping, trembles. The swallow is a bird. So the twitters is the verb there. What do most of these verbs have in common? So they end in ing. What does that lend to our poem that they end in ing? Okay, so yeah, it's got this immediate action to it where it's urgent. Everything's happening right now and it's very active. All right, so this is what's going on in the first stanza. The spring is returning. That gets repeated at the beginning of the sestet, but then we have a but. There is no returning of spring for me. Oh, heart with anguish burning, she that unlocked all April in a breath returns not. And those meadows, blossoms, birds, these lovely, gentle girls, words, empty words, as bitter as the black estates of death. That's a pretty drastic turn. Tone for the bottom. I'm going to move closer here. Hang on. Because I can't hear anything. All right, go ahead. What? I like that. And so we can collect evidence then of the words that create euphony. What would you say? I want to just kind of jump to this because this is a really good idea. What would you say creates the euphony? What sound device creates euphony in the octave. The consonants of what? Yeah, I'm just going to take this off. I can't hear anything y'all are saying today. Say that again. Okay, so we have a lot of S's. What did you say again, Alvin? The INGs could create, so the consonants of the INGs are the verb form of INGs, which is technically called a gerund verb form, or what else? So in the middle of words, we have consonants with L's. What else do you have a lot of in here? Alyssa, I heard you talking about it earlier. This is chock full of alliteration. We gleam and glitter, music and madness, dropping, dancing, seed, soul, lots of alliteration. All right, so now let's jump back down to the sestet. We've got that there's a lot of dissonance in there that we'll find in a minute, but we need a tone to put with that. What? Hatred? Okay. And so that again, if you're going to say admiration in the beginning and hatred at the bottom, that works because you've got a parallel structure of attitude, the speaker's attitude towards something. What else can we say for tone? Louder. Agonizing. So a tone of agony. Yeah, we can say agony. If there is, so if he was cheerful in the first stanza, what is the contrast in the second stanza? Yeah, so it's like maybe dread. I mean, the word melancholy that we used earlier works really well there. This is very, very depressing, right? Like he's gone from being cheerful and happy and everything's glowing to the blackest states of death. So there is, and we still have alliteration, but it's this hard B alliteration. Instead of music and madness and glitter and glowing, we have bitter as the blackest states of death, like he's spitting that last line at you. And so that could add to the dissonance there. Why? Why is he so hateful and melancholy in the second stanza? Why? What is his exact issue? She didn't come back. She returns not. There is a specific person. Have y'all ever gotten dumped in the spring? Okay, well, let me tell you, it sucks. The world is alive. He's looking out the window at all these birds. It's like that opening scene of Bambi where it's like, la, 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 and he's like, life sucks. Because he got dumped. He said, she unlocked all of April for me. She was spring. She was love. She was this. But she returns not. And after that, now compare the imagery. These meadows, blossoms, birds. How do those three words compare to the imagery of the top stanza? What do you mean literal? I like that. So up here, they're personified. Down here, though, they're not. What else are they not given down here? Well, you got blossoms and birds. Lots of bees. There are no adjectives. There is no description whatsoever. Up here, we have gleam and glitter, wet, music, fierce powers, softly blowing. And now we just have meadows, blossoms, birds. They're just empty words. He no longer can even give them an adjective. They're just empty words, as bitter as the black estates of death. All right. So this is what I love this poem because of that turn, because it shows that relationship between all the different things that are going on in these stanzas. It is time for y'all to take your break. When you come back, we're going to talk about the relationship between the octave and the sestet, and we will, and then you're going to get to do some analysis like this with a sonnet of your own. I think this is a 0. I think however this got typed in, it's a 0 and not an O. But it's really just O. It does that is just a typo. That is not something to analyze in terms of the meaning of the poem. All right.
I think Search Creek's football team has COVID, so we're supposed to play them on Friday.
Right. That's the second time this year for them, right?
I think so. But Rockville, their season ended this past week because they got COVID for like the third time.
You would think lessons could be applied that get learned by other people, you know, that you could say, hey, look what happened there. Maybe we should all just quit doing this. But no, that's way too logical. One minute. Are we all back? All right. Okay, so let's talk relationships. If you had to describe the relationship between the octave of that poem and the sestet of the poem, what are some words you might use? Opposites, okay. What is a fancier analytical word that we use to talk about opposites? Okay, so what we might have in the octave, and there's a place at the bottom of y'all's form for this, is you might have like a situation or the setup, and then the sestet then presents the contrast. Another thing that is going on in there is that the entire world is experiencing spring, but not our narrator, not the speaker of the poem. So you have a universal situation in the octave and a personal situation in the sestet. What? We're establishing options. So we're going to make a pretty long list, and then I'll come back to that. You can never say always. So you might have in the octave a cause, and then the effect of it in the sestet. You might have a problem presented in the octave and the solution in the sestet. A question posed for which you then receive an answer. You might also have in the octave a literal problem or a literal scenario that then becomes metaphorical in the octave. Or you might have a specific situation in the octave that then gets applied universally in the sestet. And we could go on and add a whole lot of relationships here. I am presenting these to you to help you discover the relationship between the octave and the sestet in the sonnets that you are about to examine. There are as many different relationships as can exist between anything. But the reason that poets write sonnets is because the structure helps them to tell their story. The structure helps them convey their message because of these predictable and expected relationships between the two parts of the poem. So, and these are reversible. Like, it doesn't have to be that there's a problem in the octave and the solution in the sestet. They could start with the solution and then explain what the problem was. It could be that it starts metaphorically and then ends with the literal. Or it starts with a universal problem and then applies it specifically, which is kind of what's going on in our Petrarch poem. So this just gives you some vocabulary and some ideas of how to apply the structure of the poem and how to think about sonnets in terms of the structure that is established helps convey the meaning. You know where to look for a turn. You know that there's going to be some kind of shift, some kind of contrast between the two. And then using some words like this, you can kind of help figure out exactly what's going on in the one that you're looking at. All right, so what we're going to do now, I have a chart that will help you to analyze the ones on the back. Flip over onto the back. And I'm going to give each of you, I'm going to assign you one to look at. And then you and your group are going to use this chart to help figure out the relationship. So you guys have Robert Frost, y'all have Wordsworth, you guys have Edna St. Vincent Millay,